shaped largely by social forces. And I guess one example of this that stood out to me is I hear all the time something like Black Southerners during Jim Crow were separated because of race. And that's not actually true. They were separated because of racism. And I think we kind of use language that reinforces race as something that's natural, that it's innate, when really it's very much a product of our social structures and social systems. So we allocate kind of inequality to the wrong cause, which I think is something you see replicated a lot when we think about defunding the police. I kind of argued that media transforms and shapes events as they're happening. So it assigned its own logic to the call to defund the police that wasn't necessarily true to what we actually wanted when we made up that statement, defund the police. So as Emerson would say, you have to rake language to truly understand what's happening, and you can't accept things at face value. So on this screen, everybody in my class kind of designed their own essay and then a gallery that accompanied like the topic of their essay. So for mine, I wanted to look at these photos, which are primarily from the Seeing in Black project, which sent out, I think, about 40 Black photographers across the US to document the George Floyd protests and to just see what the summer looked like across the country. And I think these photos for me kind of parallel another tool that media uses, which is that it paints things in black and white. Like when you look at the civil rights movement, all of the photos you see will be in black and white, like it was something that happened forever ago, that it was something that happened a long time ago. And it's kind of far removed from where we are today. Like even the fact that they're in black and white, you can't really put yourself in the picture the way you can with something that's in color. You know, it's not as lively, and it's not as present. But obviously they had color photography at the time, and they chose to put those images in black and white as if to say, oh, we're, you know, past that now. So these photos, I chose ones that were black and white to kind of look at how Black artists and Black photographers have kind of reclaimed that narrative. I can see like black and white photos as being something that's equally lively and equally, you know, as powerful and beautiful as ones in color. And then to talk back to that narrative that like, oh, all of this stuff happened forever ago. Like we're very far past, you know, a racist society when we're not. And these photos are actually from all across the country. Some of them are in New York, they're in DC, Baltimore, Detroit, like they're from everywhere across the country. And to me, it speaks to the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests from last summer specifically are one of, if not the largest displays of collective action in US history. There were 550 different locations for protests, which is about 40% of all US counties. So when I look at these photos, I really do think about, you know, how media has structured our ideas of racism, our ideas of race, and tried to convince us that it was something that happened a long time ago, when really there's so much more pervasive than that. And it's not like a moment in time, but it is this movement and this collective action that's kind of been built out over decades. But the main argument of my essay, as I mentioned earlier, was that media kind of fixated on police violence and narratives of Black criminality. So they would say, oh, there's looters, they're protesters, they're burning down Target, like what are we gonna do? And they fixate on stuff like that to kind of take away from the heart of the movement. Like they hyperfixate on violence so that they don't have to understand, you know, the call to defund the police that we saw emerge last summer as something much deeper than what it initially sounds like. You know, we were calling for structural change when we said that. You know, we don't want to just take money away from police and not do anything with it, but it's money that can be allocated towards education, towards the arts, towards social services, towards healthcare. In the past year, I think we saw like, you know, police in full-on body armor and healthcare workers, you know, struggling to find masks and wearing any sort of protective gear they could to work. So it's just about, you know, taking that money and using it to better society in other ways. So yes, policing is a racist institution, and literally we are saying we want to take money away from the police, but it doesn't end there. You know, it kind of starts there and then says, what can we do that will decrease crime and that will provide social support to communities that need it, which is really kind of what the term points to. And it's not saying that we want to get rid of all police. And then of course media, when that call came about, they jumped immediately to fear mongering. Like they put up these protesters who were, you know, breaking into buildings, and they showed you like designer stores with wood, you know, covering the front of their establishment. And it asks you to say, okay, look at these protesters, look at these looters. How can you get rid of the people who protect us? Like, how can you get rid of the people who preserve law and order in a time like this? So there's this sense that, you know, like there's a lot of fear mongering happening. And I think somebody who kind of gets at these concepts a bit more articulately than I can is Kimberly Jones. So this video was pretty widely circulated. And it's just her kind of breaking down why the Black Lives Matter movement is so important and why we kind of have to shift our perspective on looters. I don't know if any of you have seen this video before. It's pretty short. It's only about 6 or 7 minutes. But just to preface it, this is the clean version, but she does get very passionate about things. It is kind of hard to watch all the way through the first time. So if you want to take a break or turn down your volume, feel free to do so. But I do think it's something that's really worth watching. So I will.
So I've been seeing a lot of things talking of the people making commentary. Interestingly enough, the ones I've noticed that have been making the commentary are wealthy Black people making the commentary about we should not be rioting, we should not be looting, we should not be tearing up our own communities. And then there's been an argument of the other side of we should be hitting them in the pocket. We should be focusing on the blackout days where we don't spend money. But, you know, I feel like we should do both. And I feel like I support both. And I'll tell you why I support both. I support both because when you have a civil unrest like this, there are 3 types of people in the streets. There are the protesters, there are the rioters, and there are the looters. The protesters are there because they actually care about what is happening in the community. They want to raise their voices, and they are there strictly to protest. You have the rioters who are angry, who are anarchists, who really just want to shit up, and that's what they're going to do regardless. And then you have the looters. And the looters almost exclusively are just there to do that, to loot. Now, people are like, well, what did you gain? Well, what did you get from looting? I think that as long as we're focusing on the what, we're not focusing on the why. And that's my issue with that. As long as we're focusing on what they're doing, we're not focusing on why they're doing. And some people are like, well, those aren't people who are legitimately angry about what's happening. Those are people who just want to get stuff. Okay, well then, let's go with that. Let's say that's what it is. Let's ask ourselves why in this country in 2020, the financial gap between poor Blacks and the rest of the world is at such a distance that people feel like their only hope and only opportunity to get some of the things that we flaunt and flash in front of them all the time is to walk through a broken glass window and get it. That they are so hopeless that getting that necklace, getting that TV, getting that change, getting that bed, getting that phone, whatever it is that they're going to get, is that in that moment when the riots happen and if they present an opportunity of looting, that's their only opportunity to get it. We need to be questioning that why. Why are people that poor? Why are people that broke? Why are people that food insecure, that clothing insecure, that they feel like their only shot, that they are shooting their shot by walking through a broken glass window to get what they need? And then people want to talk about, well, there's plenty of people who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and got it on their own. Why can't they do that? Let me explain to you something about economics in America. And I'm so glad that as a child, I got an opportunity to spend time at Push where they taught me this, is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that Black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Do you understand that? That's what we came to do. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. Now, if I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you. And for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money. I didn't allow you to have anything on the board. I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa. That was Rosewood. Those are places where we built Black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So that's 450 years. So for 400 rounds of Monopoly, you don't get to play at all. Not only do you not get to play, you have to play on the behalf of the person that you're playing against. You have to play and make money and earn wealth for them, and then you have to turn it over to them. So then for 50 years, you finally get a little bit and you're allowed to play. And every time that they don't like the way that you're playing, or that you're catching up, or that you're doing something to be self-sufficient, they burn your game. They burn your cards. They burn your Monopoly money. And then finally at the release and the onset of that, they allow you to play and they say, okay, now you catch up. Now at this point, the only way you're gonna catch up in the game is if the person shares the wealth, correct? But what if every time you share the wealth, then there's psychological warfare against you to say, oh, you're an equal opportunity hire. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood, how can you win? How can you win? You can't win. The game is fixed. So when they say, why do you burn down the community? Why do you burn down your own neighborhood? It's not ours. We don't own anything. We don't own anything. Trevor Noah said it so beautifully last night. There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. So the social contract is broken. And if the social contract is broken, why the f do I give a shit about burning the Football Hall of Fame, about burning the Target? You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give up. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own, by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. When we built it in Rosewood and you came in and you slaughtered us. You broke the contract, so your Target, your Hall of Fame. As far as I'm concerned, they could burn this bitch to the ground. And it still wouldn't be enough. And they are lucky that what Black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
Yeah, I find that video to be very powerful, and I always have to take a little bit of a break after I watch it. But at the same time, I think it's something, like, I show this video to everybody because I think everybody needs to see it. And I think I oriented my project around the response to the murder of George Floyd and, the subsequent call to defund the police. But I think, as we see in the Jones video, it's so much deeper than that. Like, there's so much structural disadvantage that kind of preceded George Floyd, and that have led us to where we are, and that kind of continues to enable police violence today. Like, even as we saw, like, just 2 weeks ago with Andrew Brown Jr., like, there's a social contract there that was broken, effectively, like, centuries ago. Yeah, it's a powerful video. And I guess just in closing, I know, like, for me, at least, when I watch something like the Kimberly Jones video, or when I think about, all of the issues that my classmates have presented in their work, combating racism just seems insurmountable. It seems like this challenge that's, like, never going to be over. And I'm sure everybody at Continuing Conversations who's having these conversations weekly sometimes feels that fatigue where it feels like this is something that's never going to end or that can be fixed anymore. And one thing that helps me, and just in closing, is a lesson that I took away from this class and from this project. My professor often told us that, the meaning behind Douglass and Emerson's work goes so far beyond what they've actually written, and that ultimately, like, they're posing a question like, how do I live my life? Like, in the midst of all of these political questions, like, how do I conduct my life? Like, what do you do? And Emerson says that it's impossible to distance yourself from the political questions of your age. And he has this quote that, like, trying to evade politics is like trying to keep out of the frost in winter. And even by going inside and trying to escape it, you're just admitting to the fact that it has power over you and that it has a hold over you. But then he goes on to say that honestly, the best thing you can do is to try to write one stone every day. And to do one thing every day that brings you a little bit closer towards making progress or towards making the world slightly better, which is what I have taken away from this English class and from our project. So that is the end of my presentation. It was very short and sweet, but I do want to thank you all for listening and for having me at Continuing Conversations.
How's everybody feeling? Is anybody motion sick from the theme? I always feel
Joyce, we had a groove, right?
We had a moment, guys.
I love you, Chris.
This is a very common post small group sensation is, well, my group was fantastic. So we welcome everyone's energy around that. We like that spirit of appreciation, and we'd like to have just a few minutes here where we're regathered all together to give folks an opportunity, if you are so moved, to lift up, if you've got it, some little nugget that seemed particularly salient to you that you think bears repeating on behalf of the folks in your group. So go ahead, Surya.
Well, in my group, I learned there's something with, like, sometimes it's better to be a bystander in witnessing a police confrontation and to just, like, record the license plate numbers and things like that instead of trying to get involved, because then that might add tension to the situation if you get involved directly. So I found that really helpful.
Terrific. Thank you.
And I'd like to say, happens to be the same group, that I'd like to lift up what Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson told us about a program on CNN last night. And Joy, if you want to just tell the whole group, that would be great.
So it's called United Shades of America with Kamal Bell. And he regularly reports on this, but he beautifully and articulately describes what is meant by defund the police. He provides a context where you're looking at schools and policing budgets, where you're talking about qualified immunity, the role of the media, the role of training, the slave codes that date back to Barbados in 1660s, because we think that it happens in Jim Crow era, when the reality of it is this is a history tied to chattel slavery and what's allowed to happen. The notion that policing under the consent of the king meant that you were brutalizing what you thought or described as misbehaving enslaved people. So the realities are beautiful. He lays it out beautifully. And so if you have CNN and are able to watch, I highly recommend that hour of viewing. It was magnificent.
Thanks so much. And the link is in the chat.
Thank you. Oh, good. Thank you.
Who else? This is often someone reflecting on something that somebody else said. You can lift up someone else.
Sure. I'm sorry, I didn't want to speak, but anyhow, I just really want to really thank Chris for being so honest of how he, this is the reason why we're here tonight, is to be able to express how we feel about moving on. And he really made it clear about certain things that he felt, well, that's what I got from him. He felt that, things cannot truly change. And how we can go forward from there. I want Chris to know that things can change, and as we respect each other as human beings. And so I just want to express that to him, because I really appreciate him being honest of how where he was coming from.
I appreciate that. I didn't say things can't change. What in the past has happened is in the past. What we do in the future, that can change the way things are now. And that, there's a line from Don Quixote where he's talking about madness. And maddest of all are the people who prefer to have things as they are and not as they ought to be.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you.
And so that's, we can change things. You're going to have to figure out how to package it so you can sell it to other people, but that's the way it goes. First thing you got to do is you got to get rid of the phrase defund the police, because that brings up all kinds of horrible visions.
So do you think we need to change the word refund? I mean, do we need to change how we talking about this? Because the bottom line is lives a lot with the police officers.
Yeah, well, it's a soundbite. That's what people hear. They say defund the police. Mm-hmm. And that's all they hear is all their police are going to be stripped. And that's the message that particular soundbite, not accurate, but the soundbite conveys. The most effective commercial that I think Trump had during the election campaign was there's a woman whose house is being broken into, and she calls 911, and she gets an answering machine that goes, if you've got this problem, hit 1, you've got this problem, hit 2. I thought that was very effective. I shuddered when I saw it, but and I think a lot of people did, and that hurt.
Thank you. So can I piggyback on that? In my group, I suggested that we have a different phrase such as redefine the police and relieve the police of jobs that they're not qualified to do, like social work. So I think that follows on to what you're saying there, Chris.
Yeah.
The police don't want to do that stuff either. They're stuck. They're first responders.
That's why I said relieve the police. Positive for them.
Oh, yeah.
Just do their job and not do the job of 10 different job descriptions.
Yeah, because someone was mentioning a guy that he was clearly out of it, and so police don't know what they're going to get into, and so it looked like this guy was in ketamine delirium. How do you deal with someone like that? Even a social worker, he's going to be that way for about 5 or 6 hours. Something's got to be done with him, or else he might hurt himself or someone else.
Christopher, ask you a question.
True.
So, not necessarily saying agree or disagree with what you're saying. I mean, I think there's some other issues there, but let's take that to its to a natural end, right? When it comes to how we engage with a certain type of word usage or phrase or whatever, right? Like, there are a lot of phrases that make individuals feel uncomfortable and groups feel uncomfortable. White supremacy, right? Racism, right? Structural inequality, right? Capitalism, right? At what end do we simply have to now adjust, the rephrasing of, concepts that have, historical and other meanings behind them, for the sensibilities of, a group or individuals to feel better, right? So again, I'm not saying that I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying here. I mean, I think there's some other things we can talk about, but like, to what end does this now unfold into, okay, let's not say white supremacy, let's not say, you know, socialism, let's not say, right? I think you're opening up a larger Pandora's box to now say, it's like, you know, the thing that now becomes the most important thing is the sensibility of the individuals who have a problem with these things and not the actual issues themselves.
I thoroughly agree. It is a Pandora's box. It's open. And, you know, I guarantee the politicians have caught into it. So, you know, if it can't be fitted into a soundbite, it frequently gets lost. And I don't know what to do about it.
Isabel, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It was also what the media does with it. And they take that tiny little concept and they don't put it into any kind of context.
Yeah.
I just want to echo Shelley. Isabel, is there anything you wanted to contribute to the discussion?
I agree with Francis that starting with defund the police, you know, then all of a sudden you're gonna have to change tons of terminology. However, I do think that defund the police is a term that resonates with me and that I think speaks to the experience of lots of people who really do feel like policing is a harmful institution that's only ever hurt them. You know, I don't think there's something overtly radical about the phrase defund the police. And I don't think it's radical to say that we generally want a lower police presence in society and that it's not something that should ever, like, you know, intrude on somebody's life and intrude on how they want to conduct their life. So I agree. I think there's something to be said, you know, for the term and against it. But I personally, I feel like defund is a meaningful word.
Can I say something? It's Caroline.
Sure.
Okay.
Of course. Yeah. So defund the police is part of simply we need to rethink our priorities, right? And defunding the police is one of those things that we need to do to reappropriate our priorities. We need to take some money out of the police budget and we need to put some money in some other places. So Isabel said it when she said, when you defund the police, it's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the discussion about what do we do when we defund the police. It's not just like, it's about we just hate the police. It's also about other things that are not being addressed while you're overfunding the police.
Yeah. So I think, Isabel, you did a great job of getting us started tonight. I just want to, you can see the chorus of grateful hands waving, this sort of Zoom equivalent of applause. And I want to encourage everyone to take the energy that you're feeling tonight and the desire you have now to continue this conversation with you as you leave tonight. Part of the challenge of Not in Our Town, Princeton's work is that we worry that the folks here in this room are, you know, the classic phrase, preaching to the choir. And I think I always learn something. So I think it's very valuable for me to be here, but I also am very conscious of the extent to which if this is the only place I'm having these conversations, I'm doing my community and myself a disservice. So we understand that these issues are really challenging, and oftentimes we often get a sort of question after Not in Our Town's continuing conversation of like, what do I do now? Now that I have this heightened level of awareness and understanding, where do I take this energy? And we strongly encourage everyone to recognize that a lot of this is internal work. Everyone has work to do because we're all steeped in these messages, both from the media and from our institutions and society in general. We need to deepen our understanding, deepen our knowledge and our understanding, examine ourselves. It's important for us all to learn more about our history as well as the world that we're living in now. And I loved Isabel's lifting up of the concept of raking language, to not just be receiving it, but to really dig in and parse it out, to think about what's being said and what's meant and what the gaps are there. And at the same time, we need to consider our relationships with others, how we stand up on the side of justice and how we can address systemic problems throughout our country, through this, starting with your self-piece, through reading, through examining our own actions, but then by taking those increased understanding out into your community, into conversations with your coworkers, your friends, your family. How is your commitment to racial justice reflected in your calendar, in your checkbook, in your conversations? Several people tonight talked about the power of one thing. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. It's easy to feel like there's too much. We're never going to make enough of a difference. But everything counts. Every one thing counts. So what's the one thing you could do today? We invite you to continue working with Not in Our Town Princeton and attending continuing conversations. Next month, we are returning to our, now it's basically a tradition, I think, of turning the mic over to Dr. Joy Barnes-Johnson, Ms. Patty Manhart, and their students from the Princeton High School's racial literacy class. Students from the class will be talking about their transfer projects, what they've learned over the course of that course. It is widely, anybody who's ever been to this event comes back. So it's one of our most highly anticipated conversations, and we look forward to welcoming many of you there. Thank you again to Isabel for sharing your knowledge and perspective with us. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for taking time to be with us this evening. We appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, bye.
Chris. Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Caroline, give me a call.